Hi, and welcome to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. Today, we have the great pleasure of talking with Michael Fitzgerald, the articles editor at the Boston Globe magazine. Michael's written a fascinating article about a wrench that was America's most popular tool. You may not have heard of it. I'm not sure that he had heard of it before he wrote about it, but it's a fascinating tale, both about the Boston region and about 19th century industrialization. I think we're going to learn a lot about that as we talk to Michael today. Michael, it's a great pleasure to see you, and I want to thank you for joining us on Unplanned.
Sam, it's great to be with you.
Michael, I really do appreciate it. Now, I want you to tell us, I usually start by just asking people, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and then let's get into the story of this wrench that you've done so much work about.
So I'm a journalist. I'm interested in how ideas become reality, and I'm particularly interested in how businesses get formed or how products get made, and what the source of them is, and why some of them succeed and why they fail. I'm also a dad, and one of my sons is a carpentry student at the vocational program at the local high school. And as he got more serious about that, I realized there were all these old rusty tools sitting in a cabinet in the basement of the apartment building where I live, two flat. And I thought, well, maybe I can clean some of these things up and they'll be useful for him. And when I started cleaning them up, and I mean, these were rusty tools. You could not see any words on them, nothing. But when I started sort of cleaning them up, I realized that most of them were made in the Boston area, and that in particular, there were several references in these pipe wrenches, like this one, to this word Stillson. And I thought, what's a Stillson?
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Why are you curious? You're a journalist, so you've got a curious mind anyway, but you just couldn't let it go. You needed to find out a little bit more about it, it sounds like.
Yeah, I maybe it's a little hard for me to articulate that. I mean, I like things that are made. There's probably a reason why I still work at a publication that's in print, though I have been in digital only publications. But I like I mean, the object is so interesting to me because it's instantly recognizable. You might not know that it was a Stillson at one point, but you know it's a wrench. And you probably have a sense of what it's used for. So we know what these things are, and yet at some point someone had to invent it, right? So when did it come into being and why? And I find that really fascinating. And we think of Boston now as this place that creates all this software and pharma and stuff and doesn't really do a lot of manufacturing, but it was, rather quaintly now, the center of the American Industrial Revolution.
Tell us the story of this wrench and where it came from and how it came about and what role it played in the 19th century, which I think is what we're talking about here.
New England is the most industrialized part of the still pretty new American nation, and it's got the best sort of collection of capitalists and entrepreneurs, manufacturing entrepreneurs, and it also has politically the most vigorous debate about whether water is a public good. And so those are that's the kind of crucible, if you will, for the creation of what becomes this wrench. America's cities are growing really rapidly, and they're running out of wells, they're running out of springs, the water's fouled, it's contaminated. It's becoming a health hazard for communities. You had a guy named J.J. Walworth who had started a company to bring, basically he invents the radiator and forced steam heat here in the US, right? Before that, you used fireplaces, right, to stay warm, or you hoped you had a fireplace. And you start to need tools. Our tools are, they define us, and we build that they exist because we need them. And there are wrenches that predate this. So if necessity is the mother of invention, then its father is irritation. And one of the people who gets particularly irritated by how hard it is to fix plumbing, to install plumbing systems, is this guy named Daniel Stillson. And Stillson is he's kind of a mechanical genius. He's a kid from New Hampshire, comes down to the Charlestown Navy Yard, works there for a while, gets stuck on a ship.
Wait, what years are we talking about now?
This is the Civil War. He's working for Walworth and Co. in its factory in Cambridge, over in East Cambridge after the war. And in 1869, he comes into the office with this wooden version of this tool that he has whittled at home in Charlestown.
So he's just one of these, what we might call these garage inventors, what in the 20th century we'd call garage inventors. He just decided he was going to try and figure this out.
Yep. And he comes in, and his boss is like, "Oh, that's interesting. Go get a cast made at the machine shop down, in the other part of the factory." So he goes over. They comes back with a steel prototype, a working prototype, and they give him a pipe, and they say, "Okay, go into this room and either come out with a broken pipe or a broken wrench." Came back like half an hour later with the wrench fine and the pipe bent like in half.
So what happens?
No, and
yeah.
So he argues with them. He tries to sell it to them for $1,500, which was about 40 grand back then in current numbers. So not bad, but they refused it, and they said, license the thing to us. So he did that, and there were a couple of false starts there, but eventually they come up with a price that works, and he makes well over $80,000, maybe $100,000 in 19th century money. So $1.5 million, let's say. But
okay.
He takes care of his family. He becomes something of a civic leader in Somerville, but he's forgotten. And it's fascinating to me that this guy who creates this tool that we still use is basically forgotten.
What did you take away from the whole experience of learning about this guy, learning about this tool, understanding what implications it had for cities? Tell us what you walked away with thinking about it.
Well, I think there's a few things in my head around this. One is that the existence of running water in our homes is a function of being a democratic country. Here is basically an American city at the forefront of saying, in fact, no, everyone should have access to water. It should be a public good. And that's a new and novel idea that I don't think exists if you don't have a representative democracy. What that drives, obviously, is it drives this whole wave of innovation and industrialization. Walworth's company has to create radiators. Someone has to make those. They need the material for them. Eventually, they need tools to work on those things like this, and there are lots of other kinds of tools that get created as well to make these networks work more effectively, and they're iterated over time. They get better and better, right? So you've got a lot of innovation, a lot of investment in innovation, a lot of return on that investment, and then some failures, of course. But that's part of our system.
Boston? Was that not unique to Boston? Maybe it was unique to Boston. Was it very specific to Boston in comparison to the Philadelphias and the New Yorks and the other places?
American wrenches were driven by people in Massachusetts from the 1819s on. The first patents are here for in fact tools like this. This was an early patented wrench in Springfield, made by an inventor in Springfield. And so, in a sense, Stillson is carrying on this, building on this kind of wrench innovation culture that's here, the tool innovation culture, because we're creating the systems, we need the tools for them. And this becomes an area of standardization for it. A lot of the people from Massachusetts, as they migrate to Ohio and Michigan and Illinois, bring these concepts with them. And so a lot of the rest of the what becomes the industrial Midwest also has this idea of we are a representative democracy, and this is what public good is about. This is how things should be done, and citizens should pay so that everyone has access. So that's a big concept that I think is important for America overall.
What do you mean when you say that our tools define us? That's an interesting thesis, and I'm wondering if you could add some more to it.
I borrowed this line from an exhibition that was at the Smithsonian a few years back. The Smithsonian, actually, in New York, there's a Smithsonian offshoot in New York. They had a tool exhibition looking at it from a design perspective, and one of its theses was that our tools are our tools help define us because they then reshape society, and of course we define our tools. So one of the things that fascinated me about this tool, and still does, is that this does not look very different from a modern version of it. There's been some slight changes that you can sort of see if you look closely. Those emerged in the 1920s, and after this is off patent. But the basic shape is the same. So I love the longevity of this, because I think most of the things that we invent, most of our tools, are not useful for very long, and they get superseded. So I really was fascinated that this one you would still recognize 150 years later. So it wasn't an anachronism. And most of the stuff that we invent and most of the stuff we're seeing invented now won't probably be in use 150 years from now. So I like that aspect of it. But I mean, but we are, if you look at this wrench as kind of the cable modem of plumbing in America, I think that's probably the right comparison to make. The cable modem is the first kind of modem that really accelerates the internet and makes people really start to have demand for it, and spreads that network for communications into our worlds. But I don't think that we would be bothering with those kinds of things if we didn't have indoor plumbing, right?
Michael, I want to thank you for joining us on Unplanned and for sharing the story of the wrench that changed America and the person who invented it, and what that has meant for us in the 150 years since it was first developed. It was a great pleasure, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime real soon.
I hope we get the chance. It was fun. Thanks, Sam.